I was 15 minutes late, and I remember thinking that was ironic. 14 years of showing up on time for him, and the one night I walk in behind schedule is the night my marriage ends in front of a room full of strangers. The ballroom doors were already closed when I arrived. A staff member hesitated, then opened them just enough for my daughter and me to slip inside. Applause rolled toward us, loud, polished, rehearsed. The kind of applause meant for achievement, for triumph, the kind I'd sat through dozens of times before, smiling, clapping, being supportive. I followed the sound, my hand resting lightly on my daughter's shoulder, guiding her down the aisle between tables dressed in black linen and low white florals. I scanned for our seats, ready to duck in quietly. That's when I saw him. Colin stood on the stage under a wash of warm lights, tuxedo perfectly fitted, posture confident, chin lifted like a man who believed the room belonged to him. He looked exactly like he always did when he was being admired. Calm, certain, untouchable. And beside him, standing just a half step too close, was a woman I had never seen before. She wasn't staff. She wasn't an assistant. She wasn't someone who had wandered up there by mistake. She was dressed like she belonged, sleek gown, bare shoulders, hand resting lightly against his arm as if it had always been there. She smiled at the crowd like she knew them, like she had practiced that smile in a mirror and learned exactly when to use it. I stopped walking. My daughter stopped with me. The applause faded into a low murmur as the host leaned into the microphone. "Tonight," he said, "we're not just celebrating a promotion. We're celebrating the people who make success possible." I felt my chest tighten. Colin reached for the microphone, but before he spoke, he glanced at the woman beside him. The look wasn't subtle. It was familiar, fond, the kind of look you earn over time. "This," he said, smiling wider, "is Noelle. She's been an incredible support to me during this chapter." A few polite laughs drifted through the room. Some people clapped again. Others shifted in their seats. I saw heads turn. I saw confusion flicker across faces that had seen me at his side for years. Noelle lifted her hand in a small wave, gracious, composed. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. Not a friendly peck, not a congratulatory gesture, a kiss that lingered just long enough to remove all doubt. The room went quiet. I felt my daughter's fingers tighten around mine. "Mom," she whispered. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. My throat had closed around a pressure that felt like disbelief hardening into something sharper. Colin continued speaking, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that I was standing 10 rows back, frozen in plain sight. "I wouldn't be here without her," he said. "She understands the sacrifices this job takes, the late nights, the travel, the ambition." Each word landed like a clean strike. I started walking again, not fast, not shaking, just steady, deliberate steps straight toward the stage. People noticed. Chairs scraped softly as heads turned. A woman at the nearest table recognized me and stiffened, her smile collapsing in real time. Someone else whispered my name. Colin finally saw me when I reached the front row. For half a second, his expression cracked. Just enough. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened. His hand fell away from Noelle's arm as if he'd been burned. "Maya," he said into the microphone, too late to stop himself. Every eye in the room snapped toward me. I climbed the small set of stairs to the stage without asking permission. The host stepped back, startled. Noelle shifted, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time that night. I took the microphone from Colin's hand. It was warm. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice steady, amplified across the ballroom. "I'm his wife." The silence was absolute. Colin reached for the microphone again. "Maya, this isn't—" I held up my hand. He stopped. I turned slightly, just enough to face the woman beside him. "And you must be the person he's been too busy to explain himself about." Noelle's smile faltered. She glanced at Colin, searching for guidance he didn't have. "I brought our daughter tonight," I continued, my gaze returning to the crowd, "because I believed this was a family celebration, A ripple moved through the room. Discomfort, recognition, judgment. I looked at Colin then. Really looked at him. "You could have told me," I said quietly. "You could have ended this privately. Instead, you chose a stage." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "So here we are," I finished. I handed the microphone back to the host, who took it with trembling fingers. Then I turned away. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked down the stairs, back through the aisle, past people who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I felt my daughter move closer to my side, her head brushing my arm. The ballroom doors opened again, spilling light and noise behind us. Outside, the night air hit my face like clarity. I stopped on the sidewalk, took one breath, then another. My hands were steady. My heart was loud, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. My phone vibrated in my clutch. His name lit the screen. I didn't answer. I looked down at my daughter, who was watching me carefully. Waiting. "We're going home," I said. As we walked away from the building, the applause resumed inside. Awkward, delayed, hollow. I didn't hear it. All I could think was this. He humiliated me in public. Now he would lose everything in private. When people talk about betrayal, they make it sound sudden, like a door slamming. In reality, it's quieter than that. It's a series of small sounds you ignore until the silence finally scares you. I met Colin when I was 24, and he was already planning his future like a blueprint. He talked about titles, firms, trajectories. I talked about building something that felt steady. We told ourselves those were the same thing. In the beginning, he made me feel chosen. He noticed details, remembered dates, asked my opinion before making decisions. When he proposed, he said I grounded him, that I made him better. I believed him because I wanted to. We married young, before his career exploded, before the travel, before the long stretches of absence that became normal. When our daughter was born, I stepped back from my own work without resentment. Someone had to be stable. Someone had to be present. I told myself love was practical, not transactional. The years blurred into routines built around his schedule. I handled mornings, homework, doctor appointments. I managed the house. I managed the money. When his firm promoted him the first time, we celebrated quietly at home because he had a flight the next morning. When he missed our anniversary, he sent flowers to the office with a note that said, "Rain check." I framed that note. I don't know why. After my mother died, everything shifted. The inheritance wasn't extravagant, but it was secure. A trust meant to give me independence, meant to protect me. I kept it separate on paper, but in practice, I let it support us. Down payments, tuition planning, gaps when his bonuses came late. Colin knew it existed. He just didn't ask many questions. That should have been my first warning. The second was how busy he became all at once, not gradually. Suddenly, new projects, new cities, new reasons to be unreachable. He stopped asking me to join him on trips, said it would be boring, said it wasn't necessary. When I asked if something was wrong, he laughed like I'd made a joke. "You're imagining things," he said. "I'm doing this for us." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe it. There were signs I smoothed over without realizing it. A phone always face down. A password changed without explanation. Dinners canceled at the last minute. When I mentioned how lonely it felt, he accused me of being unsupportive. I apologized. I always did. I told myself marriage went through phases. That trust meant not interrogating every inconsistency. That love required patience. But patience started to feel like self-erasure. The night before the gala, he barely looked at me. He kissed my cheek distractedly while answering an email. He said he'd see us there. I remember watching him leave, feeling a flicker of unease I didn't name. After the gala, after the shock burned into something colder, I didn't go home right away. I took my daughter to my sister's apartment. She didn't ask questions. She made tea. She put on a movie and sat with my daughter on the couch while I stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls, messages, apologies typed and erased and rewritten. I didn't open any of them. At some point, my sister handed me a glass of water and said, "You don't have to protect him anymore." That was when I started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to feel the truth settle. Later that night, when my daughter was asleep, my sister sat across from me at the table. She hesitated, then took a breath. "I saw him," she said. "Weeks ago, with her." My hands went still. They were at a hotel downtown. He introduced her as his partner. "I didn't think—" Her voice broke. "I didn't think he'd do something like that to you." The room felt smaller. It wasn't the confirmation itself that hurt most. It was the relief, the awful clarity of knowing I hadn't been imagining it, that the unease had been real, that my instincts had been right and ignored. "He brought her to work events," my sister continued. "People know. They just assumed you knew too." That sentence rewrote years of my life in one stroke. I thought of the trust, the money I'd allowed to quietly support his rise, the nights I'd reassured our daughter when he didn't call, the apologies I'd made for needs I was allowed to have. I realized then that this wasn't just an affair. It was a replacement strategy. He hadn't planned to leave me abruptly. He'd planned to slide from one life into another without friction, without accountability, without losing what he needed from me until he was ready. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I wasn't angry yet. I was focused. I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and made a decision that felt heavier than any vow I'd ever taken. If he thought I was invisible, if he believed my silence meant compliance, he had miscalculated. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about survival. And I was done pretending not to see what was right in front of me. I didn't wake up angry the next morning. That surprised me. I woke up clear. There was no dramatic moment, no sobbing on the bathroom floor. Just a quiet awareness settling into place, like furniture being rearranged in a dark room. I knew where everything stood now. I knew where I stood. Colin called at 6:42 a.m. I watched the phone vibrate on the nightstand until it stopped. A message followed seconds later. "Please answer. We need to talk." We didn't. Not anymore. I made coffee in my sister's kitchen and opened my laptop. My hands didn't shake. That scared me more than if they had. The first thing I did was log into our joint accounts. All of them. Checking, savings, investment platforms, credit cards. I took screenshots, downloaded statements, time-stamped everything. I wasn't emotional. I was methodical. Years of managing our finances had trained me for this without my realizing it. Then I froze the accounts I could legally freeze. It took less than 20 minutes. I transferred what belonged to me, funds tied directly to my inheritance, into a separate account under my name only. The trust had always been mine. I'd just been generous. That generosity ended quietly, without announcement. At 7:18 a.m., his corporate card declined for the first time. I didn't know that yet. I found out later. Next, I called a lawyer. I didn't ask for recommendations or opinions. I told her exactly what I needed: immediate separation, asset protection, custody strategy, and discretion. She listened, asked precise questions, told me I'd done the right thing by calling early. "Do not warn him," she said. "Momentum matters." I wrote that down. By mid-morning, I had copies of the deed to the house, documentation of the trust, and a list of assets that existed because I'd said yes when it would have been easier to say no. I sent everything to the lawyer in one clean email. I didn't reread it before hitting send. The house was next. It felt strange, walking through rooms that held 14 years of my life and seeing them suddenly as numbers. Square footage, market value, timing. But sentimentality had already cost me enough. I called a realtor I trusted. She didn't ask why. She just asked when. "Soon," I said, quietly. While she talked, I looked out the window and thought about how many mornings I'd stood in that exact spot waiting for him to come home from trips. Waiting felt like something I used to do. not something I would do again. My phone buzzed again. Colin's name. This time, I answered. Maya, he said, relief flooding his voice too fast. Thank God. Listen, last night? I'm busy, I interrupted. My tone was neutral, almost polite. This isn't a good time. There was a pause. What do you mean you're busy? I mean, I said, that I'm reorganizing my life, and you're not part of the decision-making process. He laughed, sharp and nervous. You froze the accounts. My card isn't working. I know. You can't just… Maya, this is a misunderstanding. We need to talk face to face. We already did, I said. On your stage. His breath caught. You're overreacting. That word landed exactly where it needed to. I'm reacting appropriately, I said. You just aren't used to consequences. Silence. Then his voice changed, softer, calculated. Think about our daughter. I am, I said. That's why I'm doing this. I ended the call. By the afternoon, I'd scheduled a meeting with the school counselor, updated emergency contacts, and changed passwords to everything that mattered. I packed essentials into 2 suitcases without ceremony. Not memories. Not keepsakes. Just what we needed to function. When my daughter asked if we were moving, I told her the truth without details. We're making things safer, I said. She nodded. Children understand safety instinctively. That evening, my lawyer confirmed the paperwork was filed. Temporary orders were in motion. Custody was no longer a question. It was a structure. Colin showed up at my sister's building just after sunset. I didn't go down. I watched from the window as he paced the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, jacket rumpled, confidence leaking out of him minute by minute. This was the first time I'd ever seen him without a plan. I felt something then. Not satisfaction, not joy. Momentum. He thought I'd need time to process. He thought shock would slow me down. He thought my silence meant confusion. Instead, it meant strategy. And while he was still trying to explain himself, I was already 3 steps ahead, closing doors he didn't realize he was about to lose forever. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded like a quiet chain reaction, each link tightening before anyone realized there was no way to stop it. Colin left me 6 voicemails the first day. By the second, he switched strategies. The messages softened, then sharpened, then softened again. Apologies blurred into accusations. Confusion hardened into panic. I didn't respond to any of them. What I did do was listen. Not because I cared what he had to say, but because patterns reveal themselves when people think they're still in control. By midweek, his professional world began to feel the shift. I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't sent a single message to his firm. I didn't need to. Public humiliation does its own work. The Gala photos circulated quietly at first. Someone's phone, a cropped image posted without commentary. Then the comments appeared. Polite confusion. Side glances in text form. A few people noticed my absence. Others noticed Noelle's presence. The firm removed the Gala recap from their internal newsletter. No announcement, no explanation. Just gone. That told me everything. Noelle didn't disappear immediately. She tried to hold her ground. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance who didn't know she was delivering information. Noelle showed up to a networking brunch that weekend, smiled too brightly, introduced herself too eagerly. The room didn't respond the way it had before. People stepped back. Conversation shortened. A woman she approached glanced at her phone and said she had to take a call. By Monday, Noelle's profile no longer listed her current position. By Wednesday, it listed nothing at all. Colin noticed then. He called again. This time he didn't sound angry. He sounded unmoored. They're distancing themselves, he said when I finally answered. The firm. Clients. People I've worked with for years. I said nothing. Did you say something? He asked. No, I replied. You did. That ended the call. His family reached out next. Not to me, but to my sister. Questions wrapped in concern. Confusion framed as curiosity. No one wanted to say the word betrayal out loud, but it hovered over every conversation. I didn't clarify. I didn't correct narratives. Silence is often the most damning response. The legal consequences moved faster than he expected. Temporary financial restrictions went into effect. He couldn't access funds tied to my trust. He couldn't sell or move assets without oversight. The structure he'd leaned on quietly for years had locked him out overnight. When he tried to contest it, he was told to wait. Waiting did not suit him. He showed up at my sister's apartment again, this time earlier, like he was hoping to catch me before resolve fully set. I didn't answer the door. He stood there long enough that neighbors started to notice. That, too, worked in my favor. My daughter began asking fewer questions. Stability does that. Routine returns faster than people expect when chaos is removed. At school, her teacher pulled me aside. "She's been quieter," she said gently, "but focused. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I went home and cried then. Once, in the car, for exactly as long as it took to regain control. Colin's desperation peaked on Friday. He left a message I almost didn't listen to. "I don't know what you want from me," he said. "She's pulling away. Work is freezing me out. My brother won't return my calls. This has gone too far, too far." I replayed that phrase twice. That night, my sister forwarded me a message she'd received from someone I barely knew. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I didn't realize he was still married." The wording mattered. Still married. It meant the truth was circulating, unembellished and unchallenged. It meant the story wasn't his to tell anymore. Colin called again, later, his voice stripped of confidence entirely. "Please," he said. "Just tell me what you want." I held the phone in my hand for a long moment before answering. "I want you to feel what I felt," I said finally. Unprepared. Exposed. Powerless. There was silence on the other end. "I'm not trying to destroy you," I continued. "I'm just not protecting you anymore." I ended the call and turned my phone off. By the end of the week, the man who had stood confidently on a stage under bright lights was pacing sidewalks, checking messages that never came, watching his world contract inch by inch. And this was only the beginning. The first consequences had landed. The rest would be unavoidable. The second confrontation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Colin thought he still had room to maneuver. He asked, through his lawyer, through my sister, through a message carefully worded to sound cooperative, for a meeting to discuss next steps. Neutral ground, civil, controlled. He suggested a restaurant downtown, the kind with linen napkins and glass walls, the kind people chose when they wanted to be seen behaving well. I agreed. I arrived first. I chose a table near the center, not tucked away. Visibility matters when someone is still trying to manage appearances. I ordered water and waited. When Colin walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The confidence that used to lead his body had retreated. His shoulders were tight. His smile appeared late, like it was being forced to keep an appointment it didn't want to attend. He sat down and started talking immediately. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "I know I handled things badly. I never meant for it to happen like that. Like that." As if betrayal had a preferred setting, I let him talk. He explained how stressed he'd been, how lonely, how complicated everything had become. He framed Noelle as a mistake, an overlap, a misjudgment. He framed himself as overwhelmed rather than deceptive. People at nearby tables were listening. I could tell. The pauses were too intentional, the glances too frequent. Then Noelle walked in. She stopped when she saw us. The hesitation lasted half a second. Then she walked over. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said to Colin, her voice tight. He stood halfway, caught between them, eyes darting. "This isn't—" I looked at her then. Really looked. She seemed smaller without the stage lights. Less certain. She didn't sit. "I won't be staying," she said quickly. "I just wanted to say—" She stopped herself, swallowed. "I didn't sign up for this." Colin reached for her hand. She pulled it back. "I thought you were separated," she said, louder now. "You said it was handled." The word hung between us. Handled. People were openly watching now. A couple at the next table had turned fully in their seats. "Noelle," Colin said, his voice low and urgent. "Please." She shook her head. "I can't do this anymore. Not with everyone looking at me like I'm—" She didn't finish the sentence. She left without looking back. Colin sat down slowly, color draining from his face. He stared at the empty chair she'd never taken. "This isn't fair," he said finally. That was when I spoke. "You brought your private life into public spaces," I said calmly. "You don't get to choose who watches." His eyes flicked to the surrounding tables. People didn't pretend anymore. "I asked you here for one reason," I continued. "To tell you something clearly, without lawyers, without intermediaries." He nodded, desperate. "I'm not interested in explanations," I said. "I'm interested in separation." He opened his mouth. "And before you try to explain this version of yourself to anyone else," I added, my voice steady, "remember that the truth doesn't need rehearsing." A woman at the bar glanced over. Someone nearby murmured something I didn't catch. Colin looked around the room, finally seeing what I'd seen all along. The attention, the judgment, the quiet shift in power. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said weakly. "It already was," I replied. "You just didn't think it would be ugly for you." I stood, placed cash on the table, and picked up my coat. As I walked away, I heard a chair scrape, a whisper, the unmistakable sound of a reputation collapsing in real time. By the time I reached the door, Colin was still seated, alone, staring at the space where both women had chosen not to be. And for the first time since the gala, he understood something he'd never planned for. The audience wasn't finished watching. Colin didn't disappear after the restaurant. He did what people like him always do when control slips. They tried to rewrite the story. Within days, the narrative shifted just enough to be noticeable. A mutual acquaintance mentioned, carefully, that Colin had been under a lot of pressure lately. Someone else hinted that the marriage had been complicated for a long time. Nothing overt, just the soft erosion of responsibility. I didn't interrupt it. I watched it unfold the way you watch a weak structure take on weight it can't support. The first public post appeared on a professional networking site late one evening. Colin didn't name me. He didn't need to. He wrote about resilience, about private challenges, about how personal matters shouldn't define professional contributions. The comments were polite, supportive, non-committal. But then the replies began. Someone asked, innocently enough, if the Gala incident had been misunderstood. Another commented that integrity mattered at leadership levels. A third simply wrote, "Transparency goes both ways." The post was gone by morning. Colin escalated privately next. He sent a long email to our shared contacts, friends, former colleagues, even a few distant relatives. It was careful, measured, and unmistakably self-serving. He positioned himself as cooperative, respectful, eager to move forward constructively. He implied instability without using the word. He suggested I was emotional, overwhelmed, acting out of shock. I read it once, then I forwarded it to my lawyer. She replied with a single line, "May I proceed?" I said yes. The receipts didn't arrive dramatically. They arrived clean. A timeline showing overlapping hotel stays with firm travel dates. Expense reports tied to personal spending. Messages time-stamped during nights he told me he was unavailable. Not romantic, not sensational, just factual. Enough. The lawyer released them selectively, only where they mattered. To the firm's compliance department, to the mediation process, to the people who had been quietly questioning which version of events made sense. Someone leaked a portion of the timeline anyway, not the whole thing, just enough to clarify what misunderstanding really meant. It spread faster than I expected. By the end of the day, Colin's name was being mentioned in group chats he wasn't part of anymore. Screenshots circulated. Someone attached the phrase "overlap" confirmed beneath one image. I didn't share anything myself. I didn't have to. Colin called that night, his voice brittle. "You're trying to destroy me," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to be destroyed quietly." He accused me of revenge, of spite, of cruelty. I let him talk until he ran out of words. Then I said, "You went public first." The firm placed him on administrative leave 2 days later. The announcement was brief, neutral, devastating. Noelle tried to salvage something online. She posted about harassment, about boundaries, about being misled. It might have worked if it hadn't been for one detail. Someone replied with a screenshot of her standing on stage beside a married man, hand on his arm, smiling into applause. The post disappeared within an hour. Colin's attempts to regain control grew erratic. He reached out to people he hadn't spoken to in years. He asked for favors that no longer existed. He tried to suggest mediation without accountability. Each attempt landed softer than the last. By the end of the week, the narrative had settled into something he couldn't escape. He wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a man who misjudged how much silence protected him. I sat in my lawyer's office as she reviewed the latest updates, her tone calm, almost bored. "Momentum is in your favor," she said. "He's reacting. You're positioned." I nodded. Not because it felt good, because it felt correct. That night, after my daughter went to bed, I stood in the quiet and thought about how carefully he'd planned his life, how many assumptions he'd made about my patience, my discretion, my willingness to absorb impact. He'd believed I would protect the image we'd built together. He was wrong. The escalation wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was precise. And by the time he realized the story had finalized without him, there was nothing left to negotiate. Only consequences he couldn't talk his way out of anymore. The legal fallout didn't feel dramatic. It felt procedural. And that was worse for him. Once the paperwork moved from preparation to execution, everything slowed down in a way Colin couldn't manipulate. Temporary orders became formal restrictions. Access turned into permission. Decisions turned into approvals he no longer controlled. The trust was untouchable. The judge didn't hesitate there. It had been mine before the marriage, and protected by language Colin had never bothered to read. The funds he'd leaned on quietly, without ever acknowledging where they came from, were formally removed from the equation. His lawyer tried to argue contribution, tried to imply shared reliance. The documentation shut that down in minutes. Custody was next. There was no fight the way he imagined. No dramatic courtroom stand. Just facts. Schedules, patterns of absence, missed milestones, travel records that painted a picture he couldn't argue with. Primary custody was granted without delay. Colin looked stunned when the decision was read. Not angry, not outraged, just confused, like he'd assumed fatherhood was a title, not a practice. The house sold faster than expected. Quiet listing, clean offer. I didn't attend the closing. I signed digitally and watched 14 years reduce to a number that transferred into an account under my name alone. Colin asked if we could split the proceeds differently. The answer was no. His financial unraveling accelerated after that. Without access to shared funds, without bonuses arriving, without the firm covering expenses, his lifestyle collapsed faster than his pride could adjust. Late payments followed, then defaults. Then the silence of creditors who no longer believed his assurances. His family fractured next. His father called me once, not to argue, to apologize. He said he hadn't raised his son to behave the way he had. He said he wouldn't be intervening financially or otherwise. Colin's brother stopped returning his calls entirely. Family gatherings went on without him. Holidays passed with explanations that didn't include his name. Noelle tried to resurface briefly, attaching herself to a new opportunity, a new circle. It didn't hold. Reputations travel faster than people think. She faded from relevance without spectacle, which felt fitting. Colin asked to see me one last time before the divorce finalized. I declined. There was nothing left to clarify. By the time the decree was issued, He was living somewhere temporary, the kind of place you never plan to stay long. His career was paused indefinitely. His social standing had evaporated. His certainty, once his sharpest weapon, was gone. I didn't celebrate. I watched from a distance, detached, as consequences completed the work he'd started himself. My daughter adjusted faster than anyone expected. Children do when stability replaces tension. Her grades steadied. She slept through the night again. She laughed more freely, like the air around her had cleared. One evening, she asked, "Is Dad okay?" I told her the truth without burden. "He's dealing with the results of his choices." She nodded, satisfied. Children understand accountability more easily than adults. On the day the divorce finalized, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The dismantling wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was thorough. Everything Colin thought he could carry from one life into another, money, status, family loyalty, reputation, had been conditional. He just never imagined those conditions could expire. By the time he realized they had, there was nothing left to appeal. Only the quiet certainty that the life he'd tried to replace me with had replaced him instead. The final meeting wasn't court-ordered. It wasn't strategic. It was requested. Colin asked for it through his lawyer, who phrased it carefully, as if tone alone could soften impact. He's asking for a brief conversation. Closure. No expectations. I didn't owe him that. But I agreed anyway. Not for him. For myself. We met in a quiet office used for mediation. Neutral walls, neutral furniture, neutral air. No audience this time. No stage. Just 2 chairs across from each other and the weight of everything that had already been decided. He arrived early. I could tell because when I walked in, he stood up too fast, like he'd been rehearsing the motion. He looked thinner. Not dramatically, but noticeably. His suit didn't fit the way it used to. The confidence it once carried had left without telling the fabric. "Maya," he said. His voice cracked on my name. I sat down. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he continued. "I know you didn't have to." "You're right," I said. "I didn't." He nodded, absorbing that. There was a long pause. He seemed to expect me to fill it. I didn't. "I've lost everything," he said finally. "My job, my reputation. My family barely speaks to me. I'm not saying I don't deserve consequences. He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I never thought it would end like this." I leaned back slightly. "You never thought it would end," I said. He flinched. "I thought we'd talk," he said. "That you'd be angry, yes, but eventually, I thought we'd find a way to move forward. With you at the center," I replied. "As always." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "I loved you." I met his eyes. "You loved what I made possible." He shook his head. "That's not true." "It is," I said calmly. "You loved my stability, my discretion, my willingness to absorb discomfort so you could stay comfortable." He stared at the table. "I made a mistake." "No," I corrected. "You made a series of choices." He looked up, desperation creeping into his voice. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. And yet," I said, "you rehearsed your life without me while still standing in mine." That landed harder than anger ever could. "I just want to understand how we got here," he said. "How you became so distant." I almost smiled. "I didn't become distant," I said. "I became unavailable." He swallowed. "I don't recognize you." "That's because you never really looked," I replied. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping. "Is there anything I can do? Anything that would make this less final?" I considered him for a moment. Not the man I'd married, the man in front of me now. Smaller, uncertain, waiting for permission he no longer had. "No," I said. The simplicity of the answer stunned him. "You're not angry?" he asked. "I was," I said. "That stage is over." He looked almost offended by that. "Then what is this?" "This," I said, gesturing between us, "is closure. For me." He exhaled sharply. "I still think about you." About us. I know, I said. That's the difference. You're thinking. I'm done. Silence filled the room again. This one heavier. I never wanted to replace you, he said quietly. I stood. You did, I said. You just didn't want to lose what I provided while you tried. He stood too, reflexively, like he was afraid I'd leave before he finished. I wish you'd fought for us. I picked up my bag. I did, I said, for years, quietly, alone. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left that didn't sound like an excuse. I moved toward the door. Maya, he said one last time. Do you hate me? I turned. No, I said. I see you clearly now. That was the moment it broke him. Not rage. Not blame. Clarity. I reached for the door handle. You built your life assuming my silence meant consent, I said. You were wrong. I opened the door, paused just long enough to make sure he heard the final line. This is the last time you get access to me. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for footsteps. I didn't wonder what he did after I left. Because the confrontation wasn't about punishing him. It was about ending something completely. And I had. A year passed without announcing itself. Life didn't transform overnight. It stabilized first. Quiet mornings replaced tension. Evenings settled into predictable rhythms. The kind of ordinary that feels luxurious only after you've lived without it. We moved into a smaller place near my daughter's school. Sunlight filled the kitchen in the mornings. There was space to breathe. I didn't realize how much of my energy had gone into anticipating someone else's moods until there was no one left to anticipate. My daughter changed in ways that were subtle, but undeniable. She slept through the night. She stopped asking if plans would be canceled. She laughed freely again, without checking the room first. Safety does that. It restores what anxiety steals quietly. She didn't ask about her father often. When she did, I answered honestly without bitterness. He's figuring things out, I would say. That was enough. Work came back into my life slowly. Not the way it used to be, chasing validation or proving capacity. I chose projects deliberately. I worked fewer hours and produced better results. Independence felt different this time. It wasn't reactive, it was grounded. People noticed. Not in the way they notice spectacle, but in the way they notice steadiness. Opportunities followed without urgency attached. I said yes only when it aligned with the life I was building instead of the one I'd escaped. Every so often I'd hear about Colin. Always indirectly. He moved again, changed industries, tried consulting independently. Nothing held. Momentum doesn't survive without credibility, and credibility doesn't survive without integrity. The mentions grew less frequent. His name became a footnote, then a question mark, then nothing at all. Noel disappeared entirely. New city, new circle. No one followed. I didn't track any of it. I didn't need to. The absence of noise was confirmation enough. One afternoon, months later, I found a box I'd packed in a rush during those first days. Old photos. Programs from events I'd attended beside him. Invitations with both our names printed neatly in serif font. I looked through them once. Not with sadness, with detachment. Then I recycled them. Letting go doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it just feels finished. On the anniversary of the gala, my daughter and I went out to dinner. Nothing fancy. Just our favorite place. We shared dessert. She told me about a project she was excited about. Her voice animated, her hands expressive. I watched her and felt something settle fully into place. This was the life I'd been protecting all along. Later that night, alone, I stood by the window and thought about betrayal. Not the act itself, but the aftermath. How people warn you it will break you. How they never mention that it can also clarify you. Betrayal stripped away illusions I didn't know I was maintaining. It removed the burden of preserving someone else's image. It forced me to choose myself without apology. Freedom didn't arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, in the absence of fear. I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head. I no longer softened truths to keep peace. I no longer questioned my instincts. They'd been right all along. The woman who walked out of that gala wasn't ruined. She was released. And the man who thought he could replace her without consequence learned too late that the life she built wasn't transferable. Some endings aren't tragic. They're precise. And once they're complete, there's nothing left to look back at. Only forward, into a life that finally belongs to you. Before you go, thank you for staying with me through this story. If it hit close to home, take a second and click that hype button. It really helps this channel reach people who need to hear stories like this. I'd love to know your thoughts, or even your own experience. So share it in the comments below. And if you want more powerful stories about resilience, betrayal, and reclaiming your life, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the like button. I'll see you in the next one.